So February was obviously Black History Month, and I've gotten really used to just like tuning out everything because white liberals really have a fondness for pushing benign Black narratives down everyone's throat. And, you know, we've seen this and talked about this with things like CBC Black on the Prairies, with Being Black in Canada. And you know, these things continue to perpetuate these success stories, these positive spins, without actually dealing with the status quo oppression and narratives that are pushed by the media. And true to form for that, CBC launched The Block on February 1st, which it claims to be Canada's new home for Black music. And host Angeline Tete Host Angeline Tete-Wayo says, quote, "The Block is home, a place of belonging, its community and familiarity. It is a reflection of the depth and breadth of Black cultural contributions and innovations in music. I am so thrilled to be providing a platform to elevate the immense pool of talent in this country that has largely been ignored by traditional terrestrial commercial radio. Hip hop has saved my life, but I have been left gasping for something on the air that represents people who look like me. With this show, we can finally breathe." End quote. So hearing that quote definitely brought up a lot of feelings for me. Mostly feelings around the fact that, it sounds incredibly corny to say that a show has brought breath to you, or some kind of new revelation about music and culture that has always kind of been happening, that has always been cherished. But now that CBC has decided to prioritize it, or even give it the platform that The Block is going to be, that has somehow brought something radically different, I think is like pretty insulting, I'd say, to a lot of the work that a lot of Black folks have done. But I think also like fits in within this larger narrative and this larger idea of conforming and the role that I think media can play for Black, Indigenous, and independent kind of content creators. This last part of the quote by Angeline especially stuck with me for how it kind of, I guess, references this line that has been prominent in a lot of Black protests over the years with Eric Garner, the line, "I can't breathe." And, how it's used in this way to, I guess, maybe imply in a pretty overt way that The Block, this show about Black music in Canada, about hip hop, how that's going to bring breath to the Black community. Almost kind of in a way to imply that, this show is going to solve or, alleviate or make better these problems of police brutality, these problems of poverty, these problems of racism, of oppression. What we've needed, and the solution to that, is being platformed, being given space, for a biracial person to have a hip hop show on a national broadcaster. So pretty awful, I think, implication to use these kind of words. But I think it fits in within a lot of CBC's coverage around Black lives and how they approach these issues. And I was doing some reading recently and came across what I think is something that's pretty relevant when it comes to understanding how these narratives fit within a larger picture. So this book called The Fourth Eye, Maori Media in Aotearoa, essentially the chapter and the reading that I was doing was around the politics of recognition. So recognition specifically when it comes to Indigenous media, or in this case, we could, interchange that with an idea of Black media. So the part about recognition begins in this chapter by saying, in relation to this chapter, the politics of recognition resemble the politics of appropriation, because their central problematic asks this: what is at stake in locating indigenous epistemes within Western frames, whether those frames be Western media technology in terms of appropriation or the rhetoric of colonial compensation in terms of recognition? So I think what it's trying to ask here is, what's at stake when we try to take these Black ideas, or indigenous ideas in this case, and place them within the Western context. So it continues here with a quote by Dene scholar Glenn Coulthard, and it says here, he neatly outlines the language of recognition that has become central to the interface between indigenous groups and various post-colonial states. Over the last 30 years, the self-determination efforts and objectives of indigenous peoples have increasingly been cast in the language of recognition. Recognition of cultural distinctiveness, recognition of an inherent right to self-government, recognition of state treaty obligations, and so on. A process that promises to reproduce the very configurations of colonial power that indigenous demands for recognition have historically sought to transcend. So, reproducing the things that we're trying to transcend by seeking recognition of Western powers. And it continues here, and this is kind of the last part I think I'm going to try to read from this passage. The state, whether tacitly or otherwise, fundamentally expects their sovereign governance over all their subjects to remain intact, and thus the terms of recognition produced means the foundation of the colonial relationship remains relatively undisturbed. Indigenous media with radical intent, that is, indigenous media that desires indigenous sovereignty or the disruption of state governance, cannot, I suggest, exist within this relationship of mutual recognition. Accordingly, central to one definition of indigenous media is independence of will, the freedom and responsibility to represent oneself. The cost of such a definition would undoubtedly be, as such things stand in New Zealand at least, non-recognition and therefore a lack or loss of state funding. What we see from programs like The Block or Being Black in Canada is an attempt by the Black community to essentially affirm their existence as subjects of the state. And this becomes a very big problem when we already know that the state that we're trying to affirm ourselves to is a colonial state that has really been invested in our own oppression and continuing the status quo for a very long time. Not only that, but I think we really dilute ourselves by seeking for this confirmation or for this affirmation from people who, like I said before, have been more interested in our oppression for years than trying to find real solutions to the problems that have kept us in this place for so long. So with everything that we've covered in today's episode, we're kind of hoping to make it so that this is a cautionary tale of the pitfalls that can really easily happen with independent media coverage, obviously with mainstream media coverage. And we really hope that it serves as something helpful for you when you're trying to decipher, what's true, but also what's useful in terms of analysis. And it's definitely served as a cautionary tale for us as well, in our attempt to not only challenge ourselves and how we view things and how we cover things on the show, but also really understand how we've done things in the past and how we can evolve and continue to keep things really critical. So with that being said, we appreciate you listening to the show, and we hope to continue doing this kind of work as the season continues.